Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. As I continue into my third day of fasting, all I've had so far is bone broth. Since my last full solid meal was Tuesday, I finished eating at 5:30, and I'm trying to beat this gut bug. So it turns out something is going around Louisville. I know several people who have this, so I don't think it was the iced tea that I drank the other day, Monday, that had mold in it. After all, I think I've just got something, and I've been fasting in hopes that my immune system, my body can combat it easier if it's not digesting food. And but I think I'm going to break my fast tonight. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to have to, because I don't feel good. I have no energy, and I have to do something about it. Before we start today's show, which is going to be a fascinating show, people love to say perception is reality, and it is, really is. But how do we assign reality in our brain? We take it for granted, right? You look at your hand, you know it's your hand. The baby looks at its hand and is amazed, like, oh my God, that's my hand. They understand that between proprioception. But there are some people that they don't have that. They suffer from types of disorders that don't allow them to connect. Their body is their body. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about how we assign reality. Before we get started, we have to thank our title sponsor, Legendary Foods, makers of the amazing Tasty Pastry. What started out to be an alternative to a Pop-Tart, a healthy alternative, has become so much more. These things taste like cake. When you're eating them, you don't think to yourself, oh, I'm eating something good for me. You think you're eating cake, but they have less than 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of protein, high quality protein, and 4 to 5 net carbs. For those of us who count carbs, whether you're keto or low carb, they are amazing. If you go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10, you'll save 10% off of them. I promise you, if you buy them once, be prepared to buy them again and again and again, because everyone in your home will demand that you order them again. Kids love them, and why not? They think they're eating crap, but they're not. You can give them to them for breakfast in the morning and be like, oh my God, my mother gave me a Pop-Tart this morning for breakfast. They don't have to know. They don't have to know what's good for them. Check it out. And now, without further delay, cue up the graphics here. Bring my guest on. And this is Heather. I didn't ask you, is your last name pronounced Iriye?
How did you know that? Nobody knows that. Well done.
Yeah. I've gotten good at guessing names after 16 years. It's phenomenal. I have so many people that tell me. And by the way, if it looks like I'm getting shorter, it's this damn super expensive chair the sponsor gave me, and it keeps sinking. I've had it for about a year, and the center post, I keep raising it, and then it slowly sinks down. So I'll probably be at the show.
Okay.
Welcome to the show, Heather. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing better. I've made a decision that I'm going to break my fast later. I'm excited about that.
I think that's for the best.
Now, I'm going to start with something light. I think I'm going to have some raw eggs, believe it or not. Maybe a half dozen raw eggs, because they're very gentle on the stomach.
Are they?
Oh, yeah.
I would not have guessed.
And actually, raw eggs are good for the stomach. Like, if you have inflammation in your stomach, There are studies that show that cooked eggs are good. And really raw eggs are better, but nobody wants to tell anybody to eat a raw egg because they're like, oh, salmonella. I've been eating raw eggs for like, I don't know, close to 30 years now, maybe longer. Never got sick from one of them. So anyway, so let's talk about you. Enough about me. This is a fascinating study. How does the brain create our perception of reality? Why is it even important to us, Heather?
Why is the perception of reality important? So my study has a lot more to do with a specific aspect of perception, which is perception of your own body. And there are a lot of kind of different avenues that you can study that from, but the one that I like to take is about body ownership. And as you were saying, you know, you look down at your hand, you look down at your foot, it feels like your hand, it feels like your foot, you feel like you can move it any way that you want, that you have agency of control over it, that if somebody touches it, you're going to feel that touch, and that there's this subjective feeling that you own your own body. And it's really easy to take that for granted, and we do all of the time. But there are some individuals, they have something called somatoparaphrenia, and they will look down at their limb and feel like it doesn't belong to them anymore. And they have a complete detachment from this piece of tissue that doesn't feel like it belongs to them at all. And they will even go so far as to seek out doctors to remove that limb because they're so psychologically upset by the fact that something is attached to them that doesn't feel like it belongs to them. So what we study is how this really basic sense of body ownership arises, and what my lab studies in general, but my specific avenue on that is how that contributes to our ability to form and retrieve memories. So if you think about it, all of your memories are composed of a lot of different things that are associated with your body. So you have sights and sounds and smells, exactly, feelings of touch and movement. And these all depend on you having a coherent representation of your body, if something to anchor all of those experiences onto, it's something to map your experiences onto. But if you start losing that, what happens is your memories can start falling apart and they become more fragmented. You remember less, they feel less vivid to you. So that's exactly what we're studying right now, is how that fundamental feeling of body ownership contributes to our ability to make memories.
I want to ask one question and get right past it.
Yeah.
Where does the mind reside? Does the mind, I know the mind is influenced by lots of things, but where does the mind reside?
Do you want to define mind for me?
The place where you perceive things.
The place where you perceive things. The place where you perceive things, I guess, would be kind of, for me, that's kind of all over the place. So your brain is processing signals arising from your body constantly. But that's not to say that your mind doesn't only reside inside of your skull, for me at least, because we know that we have neurons that are present in our hearts, they're present in our digestive tracts and our guts. And we as scientists are really just starting to learn about how these different types of brains, so there's really kind of 3 of them, work together to create this thing that's called you and your ability to interact with the rest of the world. But philosophy of mind is an entire kind of discipline on its own. We could talk about that for ages.
Okay, and Tony C says consciousness can't be pinpointed to any one place. That's interesting. Okay, you agree with that?
I'd say right now we're still lacking a clear definition of consciousness, so that's absolutely accurate.
Okay, good. Okay, so getting back to the subject at hand. So where is this body ownership process? Is it processed in one area of the brain or multiple areas of the brain?
Great question. So there have been several fMRI studies looking at body ownership and where that happens in the brain. We use this thing called a rubber hand illusion or a full body illusion. And maybe some of you have heard this before, but basically what happens is participants are seated at a table and their hand is placed maybe on this side of the table, and there's a big wall that goes up so that they can't see their hand. And on the side of the wall that they can see is a rubber hand. And what an experimenter does is they basically touch the rubber hand and the participant's hand in the same place at the same time. And if you do that for long enough, it starts feeling like the rubber hand belongs to the participant. And you can even go so far as try to stab the rubber hand with a knife and actually like pierce it, and the person will jump back as if it's really their hand. But
Right.
if those seen and felt touches are delivered out of time with one another, that breaks the illusion, and you don't feel that ownership over the hand. So people have done this inside of fMRI scanners that are tracking blood flow around the brain to see which areas are activated by this rubber hand task, to see where this feeling of ownership might come from. And the one that kind of keeps coming up most popularly is called the Pre-Motor Cortex, and it's right about here. It's associated with like motor planning mostly. And there's also the intraparietal cortex, which is kind of in between the parietal lobes, for lack of a
Okay.
picture to show you.
But they're in the brain, right? They're in the brain. That's where they are.
Yeah, I mean, the studies that we've done are definitely looking at the brain regions.
Okay. So talk about your study. Why did you feel compelled to do your study? What work preceded yours that this was the next logical thing to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in 2014, my supervisor now, Henrik Gerson, he did a really great study. It was called Out-of-Body Induced Hippocampal Amnesia, which is a great title for a paper. But what he did was he was really interested in looking at visual perspective. So whether you experience things from inside of your body or outside of your body. So kind of looking at out-of-body experiences and using a series of virtual reality headsets connected to cameras. He actually had participants come in and engage in realistic social interactions with a Confederate actor from a perspective that was either located inside of their body or outside of their body, as if they're kind of like watching themselves carry out this event. And then a couple of weeks later, he brought them back into an MRI scanner and looked at what happened when people tried to repeatedly retrieve memories that were kind of formed from an in-body versus out-of-body perspective. And what he found was that this region of the brain called the hippocampus, which is the seat of memory pretty much for the entire brain, it really was affected by whether memories were formed from an in or out-of-body perspective. So that's kind of where some of my PhD work came from, as well as my current study, because that effect that we see at retrieval, it's interesting in its own right for sure. But what I wanted to know whether there was something that was going on as a memory was being formed in the hippocampus that was sensitive to this level of body ownership and perspective that you're viewing an event from. So if this is a facet of retrieval and only something that comes online later, or if it's really part of memory formation right from the beginning of it. Also, earlier in my postdoc here, I work at the Karolinska Institute, the Brain, Body, and Self Lab. My first couple studies were looking at memory accuracy and how we re-experience and relive our memories and how vivid they can be. And what we were finding is that when you lose a sense of body ownership, this actually reduces your memory accuracy and it reduces your sense of emotional intensity and belief in the accuracy of your memories and reliving and all the things that go into re-experiencing the past. So your body really seems like this fundamental anchor that we need to be able to form and retrieve memories. My behavioral work was showing that, this is having an effect on memory accuracy and re-experiencing, but what I really wanted to know what was going on in the brain that was causing it.
So Mtor, which many of us love because it's what helps drive muscle protein synthesis for those of us who are zealots in the gym and want to stay as muscular as we can for the rest of our lives. I'm one of those. Mtor plays a large role in memory formation. There was actually a drug that was created to help people who had traumatic events. And the drug specifically targeted Mtor in the brain. So Mtor both helps to form memories and also helps to retrieve memories, unfold them, and then put them back where they belong. And so they gave people a drug after they had a horrendous situation. Maybe these guys were in the war and they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. They gave them this Mtor inhibitor, but the problem with it was so they gave them the Mtor inhibitor, and then they forced them to recall some of these really bad memories. And since they couldn't activate Mtor in the brain, they couldn't put the memory back, and the memory was gone. The problem with the study was that they couldn't let these people go home until the drug wore off, or they wouldn't remember their wives and their children, because they'd get home, they'd unpack those memories. Oh, that's my wife. But then they wouldn't put them back where they belonged, and they wouldn't be able to retrieve them. So, the question then becomes, does Mtor play a role in body ownership? Is it possible that there is an inhibition in forming memories that allow you to own your body, that recognize that that's my hand.
I haven't heard of this Mtor, so I can't comment specifically, but
Okay. No,
yeah, I think body ownership is something that's happening all of the time. It's a computation that goes on continuously over and
Right.
over again without you having to realize it. So it just it feels like a background process that serves as a base layer for memory processing.
Mhm.
I'm not sure, but maybe it sounds like this Mtor thing is coming in at a bit of a higher level.
Yeah. What about psychedelics? They
Mm.
distort our perception of reality. We may look at our hand and go, is that my hand? It's got, 1,000 little purple bugs on it. But then once it wears off, you don't hold those same feelings towards your hand. What about
Mhm.
psychedelics? How do they play into this discussion?
Psychedelics are fascinating. And what your brain is trying to do at all points is trying to predict what's going to happen next. It's a giant prediction machine.
Interesting.
And
I never thought of it that way, but you're right. It's trying to know what happens next because we have to have agency and control over everything in our lives.
exactly, and you need to be able to anticipate. Otherwise, we'd be very much dead, especially at the rate that our world changes, right?
Right.
So yeah, Anil Seth, he's got a great TED talk. He's yeah, his kind of idea is that we generate our perception of reality in our brains, and everything that we see is like a verified prediction of what we've anticipated already.
Interesting.
He called it being a beast machine, which I think is a really great way of explaining it. But yeah, so psychedelics, your brain is constantly generating predictions, and usually, you have a routine. So like you wake up, you go to work, maybe you get your morning coffee. Like there's just this kind of set groove of things that you expect out of your day. And to kind of offload the amount of work that your brain needs to do, it will just keep following these grooves. So once like you have one set perception or like understanding that, if I see a pear, it's probably going to be green. That's one groove that I've created. What
Right.
psychedelics do is they break you out of those grooves. So instead of always kind of going down the same ski slope, it opens up an entire new mountainside that you start exploring. It's increasing the amount of free energy in your brain.
Mhm.
So it's wonderful while it's happening, and it's part of the reason psychedelics have been discussed in the context of treatment-resistant clinical depression, and kind of breaking people out of
Anxiety.
old habits. Exactly, just kind of reframing their perception and reframing how they think about themselves and the external environment, the relationships. It's like a brand new set of eyes, really. And then you come back to your normal set of reality, but maybe those grooves have changed a little bit and you start seeing things a little bit differently because of that experience where you were opened up.
I'm not a fan of microdosing. I started
Have you
tripping.
tried?
I started tripping when I was in high school, and I had amazing things happen in my trips. And I was fortunate to meet Timothy Leary in 1986, 85,
Wow.
86. He spoke
cool.
at, I was living in Las Vegas, and he spoke at UNLV, and no one showed up because nobody knew who he was. And it was like a cold November night. It was rainy. I remember I took this girl that I knew, and we were like 2 of maybe 16 people that showed up.
Yeah.
So he had everybody moved to the front of the auditorium, and he stood down on the ground, and we talked. And then we each had a chance to talk to him. And I actually, I really hogged his time. But he told me something then that actually has been proven in science just in the past 3 years. Because I had a chance to meet Jamie Weil, becoming Superman. And he confirmed that they finally discovered this. LSD and psychedelics allow your brain to bypass the corpus callosum. So hemispheres can talk directly and unrestricted to each other. This is where synesthesia comes from. Your nose, your olfactory senses combined with the area of your brain that distinguishes colors, they get together, and all of a sudden you can smell red. You really can. It's like, wow, that red has a smell to it. And so he said this back then. He said, hallucinogenics allow the brain to freely communicate without the gatekeeper, which is the corpus callosum. That's the clearinghouse. If you want access to this lobe, you have to ask the corpus callosum, and it'll connect you, kind of like the old-fashioned operators. He said, when you trip, that's when you bypass it. And the reality is, he predicted then that microdosing would not do the same thing for people. You have to trip because the inertia of the trip is what causes all of these neural connections to reform in a different pattern. And that actually has been shown to be true about 3 years ago in a study, that when you trip, you bypass the clearinghouse of all of the data in your brain. I thought that was fascinating. But I'm not a fan of microdosing. I think people need to just trip. You don't have to do 5 grams of mushrooms. You can probably get by with 2 or 3 and experience, changes in colors and context of your reality, and then it wears off and you're fine. That people are always afraid that, if I trip, what if I go crazy? You're only going to go crazy if you think you're going to go crazy when you trip. That's the only thing. If you can sit it out for 5 hours, if you don't like the experience, go home, sit in your house and watch Netflix for 5 hours. That's all.
That's all. I think I read like an interesting study though about like parents who microdose end up being like much more patient, much more kind, much more playful. So I see like, if you don't have 5 hours to trip, maybe have some kids around.
But I predict that all this research on microdosing is going to show some good. But what they're going to find out is that when you full on trip, things change forever moving forward. You don't have to keep microdosing to restart. But anyway, so let's talk back about your study now. So how was your study designed? I thought this was fascinating, by the way.
So what we used was a variant of the rubber hand illusion I was talking about before, which is called the full body illusion. So instead of having a rubber hand, what we do is I have this virtual reality headset and I immerse participants within these 3D videos that I spent a whole summer filming around Stockholm. And in each of the videos, there's a beautiful background scene of a famous location in Stockholm and all the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So people going by with their dogs, birds in the background, cars moving by. But in the foreground of the scene is a mannequin's body from a first-person perspective, just dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. And this is when the participant looks down, because they're also lying on a bed, the position of the mannequin's body lines up with the position of their body. So they are getting this first-person view of a mannequin. And like the rubber hand study, what they watch in the video is a mannequin's torso being repeatedly stroked with a ball on a stick. And then I am there with the participant and I'm stroking their torso in time with what they're seeing in the video. And after about 20 seconds, they start feeling like they have ownership over the mannequin's body and they're embodying the mannequin. But if those seen and felt touches are out of time with one another or asynchronous to each other, this breaks the illusion, so that feeling of ownership is no longer created. So after an initial 20 seconds to kind of establish or break the illusion, depending on the video, after that, this kind of scene plays out where me and my colleague are talking about a specific object or a specific event, and it's the participant's job to remember as much as they possibly can about everything in that scene, from what the woman with the dog was carrying in her hands besides the leash to what me and my colleague were talking about in the scene, what object we exchanged. So their job is to remember as much as they possibly can. So we have these two conditions where people are forming these memories for very immersive, lifelike events. But at the same time, they're inside of an MRI scanner where we're tracking blood flow throughout their brain. And we can actually see differences in how these memories are formed when people have a sense of body ownership versus when they don't. And then 1 week later, we actually bring them back. So they retrieve these memories again during brain scanning. And we can look at differences in how body ownership affects the way that these memories are later retrieved a week later. And the thing that I really loved, my favorite part of this study, was comparing patterns of activity at encoding and retrieval. Because when you're retrieving a memory, what you're really doing is just reactivating everything that was active when you first laid down that memory.
Right.
And the more that pattern of retrieval matches what happened during memory formation, that's called memory reinstatement. And the stronger that memory trace is going to be. So my big question with this study is this memory representation, is memory reinstatement stronger when you have a sense of body ownership as you're forming the memory versus when you don't? Sorry, I can't hear you. There you go.
Now, so the retrieval part, you just asked them to recall what you did last time in the lab. That's it. I mean, you didn't set them back up with the mannequin and put the stick back up or anything like that, right?
That's actually what I'm doing now. But the retrieval in this study that I talked about was they see the video cue. So the title of the video is always where the video was filmed. So for example, Central Station or Stromkajen. And then participants receive a cue to close their eyes and then picture that memory in as much detail as they can for 17.5 seconds until they hear a beep in their headphones telling them to open their eyes. So people are really just closing their eyes and they're trying to put themselves back inside of that experience to the best of their ability. Imagine everything that was happening in the scene, the visual details, what the dialogue was, like maybe how their body felt as well. But again, yeah, so we are now looking at what happens when you re-immerse participants within those scenes instead of having them close their eyes, and what happens when you play with body ownership at retrieval as well as encoding, and how might that influence the way the brain's going to retrieve information. I'm so sorry, your microphone's looking out a bit.
It's my microphone. I have to hear you okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now you're good.
So in other words, it's not just a matter of forming that memory the first time, but it's the accuracy in which you recall it and then put it back so that you can retrieve it again and again and again. I have a couple of questions, and there's some comments by people in the audience I want to work into. We're going to take a quick commercial break.
Sounds great.
When we come back, please feel free to ask questions. We'll work them into the show, I promise. You are watching and listening to Superhuman Radio. You're going to be smarter in about 20 minutes. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Microbes make up your immune system. That's why I'm really excited about P3OM. P3OM is a patented probiotic that might be the most effective probiotic ever developed. P3OM fights bad bacteria and strengthens immunity. Basically a germ-fighting superhero. But it also helps digestion, speeds up metabolism, and increases energy throughout the day. That's way more than I thought a probiotic could do. And just when I thought P3OM couldn't get any more powerful, I watched a video that you can find at shrnetwork.biz/P3-OM of this probiotic literally breaking down a piece of steak. After I saw that, I was all in. Here's some more awesome news. You can get 10% off P3OM right now by going to shrnetwork.biz/P3-OM and by using the coupon code SHR10. And if you order it and it's not everything that you thought it would be, they will give you 100% of your money back, no questions asked. So if you want to protect yourself from whatever bug is floating around this year and take your digestion to a new level, visit shrnetwork.biz/P3-OM and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off today. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High quality, pasture raised, great tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose to tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use the code superhuman to save 10% off your entire first order. Have you been struggling to achieve results in the gym? Trouble sleeping through the night? Overwhelmed with stress or anxiety? Look no further than Infiniwell supplements. They have designed products to address specific needs like muscle growth, hormone balance, sleep, and anxiety from the first use. Infiniwell helps you live well. Go to shrnetwork.biz/bewell, that's BEWELL, and use code SHR20 and start living well today. Redcon One's new BAR bar is the ultimate soft-baked protein-packed snack bar, powered by peanut butter. Perfect for while on the go to help curb hunger or sneaky sweet tooth cravings. With 20 grams of protein, use as a meal replacement bar or when you're in need of a high-protein snack. Eat a Redcon One bar as a midday snack or for fuel before an intense training session. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Redcon1 and use the code SHR25 and save 25% off these delicious bars today. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. Don't hate us because we feel good.
Hey, welcome back. Can you hear me?
I can. Yep.
I feel like one of those old cellular commercials. Can you hear me now? Hey, so I have a question, and we have a lot of intelligent questions. I have the most intelligent audience in the world. There isn't one person in this audience that couldn't sit down and do this show in my absence. And I'm hoping to lure a couple to do that so I can take the time off. Is there how many incidences of this memory impression must occur before the brain believes that the rubber hand or the rubber torso is actually part of its body?
It's surprisingly fast, which is kind of the scariest thing about this, because like our bodies always feel like our bodies. Like, even if you think about it, when you were a kid or a baby, obviously things have changed, and I think that's kind of why these calculations happen online all the time, because our bodies are constantly changing. We're aging, we're growing, maybe we're gaining weight, losing weight. So we need to be able to have a very flexible body representation, and that's obviously very evolutionarily adaptive for us. We need that in order to function. But the consequence of it is, if you start doing these illusions or you start having specific brain disorders or traumas, they can all fall apart kind of scarily easily. So yeah, there are a few studies looking at the onset of these different types of illusions, but some of them are reporting as fast as 10 seconds. And then for some participants, like they'll get the illusion, but maybe only after about like 90 seconds of stimulation. So it's something that's very subject to individual variation, which is a very hot topic of interest right now in our field. What exactly is underlying that susceptibility to the illusion? And then for certain people, they don't get the illusion at all, and they tend to be people that are very kind of in tune with their interoception or how their bodily states are, and they're very kind of aware of their body already. So it makes it harder to kind of mess with it with these full body and rubber hand illusions.
So I was at one point in my life, I was very unhappy in my life, and I ballooned up to 330 pounds. And actually, it's the genesis of the show, because I had to save my own life because I was dying. They told me I was going to need a pacemaker, and thank God I've never needed a pacemaker. But I remember looking in the mirror at my big fat body, and I remember thinking it wasn't me. I mean, I remember having this feeling like, I can't effing believe that's me. Like, it doesn't feel like me. So obviously, I never took ownership of that big body. And I wonder if that plays a role in people who successfully lose weight and then keep it off for the rest of their lives, because they never saw themselves as belonging to that person, that big fat person. And so, and once they lost the weight, they had no problem keeping it off. Any ideas?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it breaks my heart a little, because it must have caused so much cognitive dissonance to not be able to connect with what you see in the mirror. That's really heartbreaking.
No, I was fat. I had big round. I have a lot of loose skin because my face got so big and round. I looked like Jackie Gleason. I don't know if you know who Jackie Gleason is. I have a good friend who's in movies. I have a really good friend. His name is Steve Sharippa, and he's been in a lot of movies. He always plays a gangster. He's a big guy. He's got a hoarse voice, and he's a big guy. I mean, he's probably in the upper 300s. I haven't talked to him in a long time. I hope he doesn't hate me for saying this. But like, when I used to look at myself, I just never owned it. I just thought, this is not me. It's got to change. I'm going to change anyway.
Yeah, it seems so like at odds with your psyche and what you want.
I didn't know. The only thing I could think of when you're talking, I'm saying I didn't own that person. I never owned that person. That person, I never saw that person as me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, so my study kind of relates a bit to dissociation and dissociative tendencies, and if you're going through something really stressful or a particular traumatic event, Some people might dissociate from their bodies entirely. And one avenue that I'd like my research to kind of go in is looking at, okay, if you dissociate from your body, you lose that sense of ownership. Yes, you might, remember less accurately the event details that were inside of that memory. And yes, you might re-experience it to a lesser degree. But it actually might be kind of adaptive, because your memory is incredibly malleable and we need it to change, just like your body representation, all the time. And if you're going through something really difficult, like you were with your weight journey, or if someone is going through post-traumatic stress disorder and really needs to find a way to make these traumatic experiences kind of work for them and integrate them within the rest of their narrative life frame or whatever else is going on, to see it from a bigger picture, you can't remember that traumatic event exactly as it happened. So this actually might be a very clever way for your brain to put this memory into a more kind of malleable state, to kind of take off the vividness and the edge of it, to kind of dampen down the accuracy of the details and kind of turn it into something that you can use later on, which is where I'm kind of going with this research.
There's a guy that I have to thank. So one day I owned an alarm company, and I was coming in early in the morning because I had the guys, I had to get them out on their trucks and all that sort of stuff. And I was drinking a cup of coffee and I was eating some sort of pastry. And so I'm driving with one hand, I'm trying to turn the wheel, and I got the pastry and I got the coffee. And this guy, when I finally turned into my parking lot, he rode by and he rolled down his window and he said, "Why don't you stop feeding your fat face, you F?"
Oh my God, that's just.
But you know what?
Diabolical.
That crystallized how much I hated the way I looked. And that really played a big part in my decision to change things. But anyway, he did me a favor. I'd love to know where he is. Okay, so here's some really good questions. This is from Taylor C. He says, can Dr. Iriye speak to memories that are gained by organ donation recipients from the donor? I've heard a retired surgeon speak about this after retirement, because he was afraid of his reputation being harmed if he would have talked about it before he retired. What do you think?
I am fascinated. I have not heard of this, but I'm going to immediately look it up as soon as I get off. Or if Taylor, if you have any resources, please send them my way. I guess, what would the organs be that you would get a memory from?
Oh, kidney. People get heart transplants. They get kidney transplants. They feel connected to the person that technically saved their lives. And so this is one of the things that I've started to really do deep dives on this show, because I'm fascinated by this. Like, the brain is influenced by a lot of things in the body. Microbes in the gut create chemicals that affect how the brain works and how it moves and thinks and all that sort of stuff. And we don't know, when you take a foreign piece of tissue that you have to literally use an anti-rejection drug to keep the person from rejecting it and put it in their body, that tissue has to have some sort of original, I don't know what to call it, some original intelligence from the person that it was in originally that isn't the same as yours, because it didn't evolve in your viscera. It didn't evolve with your blood. It didn't. And now all of a sudden it shows up. So, and let's talk about phantom pain. I know people that had legs amputated and the leg still hurts. It's like, it can't hurt. It's gone.
That has actually a really great neurological basis, though, because you have a piece of your cortex called the somatosensory cortex, and it contains a map or a homunculus of all of your body parts. So it's kind of cute because it looks a bit like Mick Jagger. It's got really big lips and a giant dick and really big hands. But that's kind of how your brain represents your body. And say you lose your arm, it's physically gone, but that cortical space, that piece of your brain that has that representation, is still there. So the phantom pain is actually, your brain region trying to make sense of, I've got this piece of brain that I know I need to use for an arm, but there's no feedback coming back from the arm. So it's a adaptation, basically, and its response is just to feel pain or feel like the phantom limb is incredibly bunched up. And you can do these really great mirror box illusions to convince people that, their right arm is actually their missing arm, and you start getting them to move their intact arm inside of the mirror, and that makes their brain feel better, and all of a sudden the pain
it goes, oh, there's an arm there, everything's okay.
Yeah, prediction confirmed, going back to our
you know who else suffers from this? People who undergo radical cosmetic therapy, like people who ballooned up to 800 pounds. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. they balloon up to 800 pounds and then they lose a bunch of weight. And so they have to go in and they have to have this surgery to remove all this overstretched skin. They're called appendiculars. And when they remove that skin, they actually start to have this phenomenon that, I've been injecting myself for decades. I'm on HRT, and before that I used performance enhancing drugs, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, I can tell you if I'm going to hit a vein. When I put a needle in the skin, I feel this sting, this pinch.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime I've gone in and continued in and aspirated, I'm in a vein. So the outside of your skin knows where stuff inside your body is, and it tries to protect you from hurting that stuff. And when people have that skin removed, the body is confused and they have pain.
Ooh.
They have pain that doesn't exist. It's kind of like the phantom arm phenomenon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's like, you'd have to re-update your entire organization of what your skin maps onto.
If you can't answer these questions, don't feel compelled to come up with an answer. Any thoughts on Ibogaine and getting rid of addiction?
What is Ibogaine?
It's a drug. It's I know somebody who just recently used it to try to help his addiction. Ibogaine seems to increase dopamine. Addicts tend to have this love-hate relationship with dopamine.
We all do.
Popping is more important. When you go out to score drugs, the dopamine starts to flow. When you actually use the drugs, that's not the mission. The mission, when you feel good, was the actual going out to get the drugs. And Ibogaine is supposed to help addicts kind of unload that.
I guess it's something that might kind of come out of that, I suppose. Because if you are an addict and looking for ways to kind of reframe your thinking around drugs, one strategy might be to, focus on different things when you're retrieving a memory. So generally, you can retrieve memories from different types of visual perspectives. So you can retrieve them from a first-person perspective, which is how we usually experience the world under normal circumstances. You're looking out of your body, you feel centrally located in your body. And if you retrieve memories in your mind's eye from that perspective, it actually focuses you more on the bodily sensations and the mental reactions and how you were feeling and psychologically as that event was taking place. And it really kind of tries to recreate that event in as much accurate detail according to how you were feeling at that precise time as possible. But if you retrieve certain events from a third-person perspective where you feel like you're an observer and you're actually seeing yourself inside of that mental scene or memory, that focuses you less on the body reactions and what you were going through internally, and it focuses you more on the context around that memory in general and kind of shows you what that event means, not just locked in that piece of time, but how it fits together within a broader narrative of your life. So kind of this relationship between your body and this in-person, first-person perspective and this third-person perspective and seeing things more widely and broadly might be an interesting kind of way of thinking about memories associated with addiction, about trying to see them from this third-person perspective, detached from your body so they won't be as emotionally intense for you. But maybe you try to see how that event is going to connect to other things that happen down the line and kind of create more meaning out of it for you.
Interesting. Very interesting. Joel Jha, he's a big fan of the show. He's almost always here. He said, LSD is one of the most destructive drugs I've known. Not everyone needs it. I agree with that. So if you're somebody who has schizophrenia, like in your brain, so most people develop these types of neuroses when they go through puberty. We see this in young children, and we see this in women post-menopause. We see postmenopausal women with the recession of sex hormones, the brain starts to react differently as well, just the way young children going through puberty. And you're right. There are people out there that will trip and it will ruin their lives. There's no doubt about it. I agree with you. And I only thank God I wasn't one of those people, because I still think about some of my trips. One of my favorite trips was I did 2 hits of window pane and went to see Kiss New Year's Eve night at Madison Square Garden.
That sounds fun.
And when the stage erupted when they did Firehouse and the stage erupted in flames, I don't remember anything after that night. I drove home. I was the person driving. I drove everybody home, but I don't remember anything because it was like such a sensory overload watching the flames, and the music was so loud. And I can remember everything up to going to the concert. I can't remember driving home. But yes, I know.
Maybe you blocked that memory out because it was so scary.
No, I don't think it was so scary. I think that it was so overwhelming that my brain went into like this protection mode. Like,
Yeah,
okay, this is too much for us. We're going to protect. Craig Hollander has a really great question. He says cross-laterality is when a person does specific things like writing, eating, using scissors, etc., with one hand, but can only do sports with the other hand. Can you explain this phenomenon?
Very, very interesting. Can only do sports with the other hand side. I guess, again, this is not something that I'm familiar with, but lateralization in the brain is incredibly complicated, and it's not just like a left brain, right brain kind of a thing. It ends up being a lot more nuanced. But I guess if I had to think about something off the top of my head, it must be in terms of like the specific context that you're doing something in, right? Because these writing, eating, using scissors, that seems to be kind of falling under one category of things versus sports, which is be a very highly tuned motor skill of some kind that you only use in one specific context. Maybe for some reason, somewhere along the line where you were learning how to do that sport, there's just an association that was made, and now that memory is just kind of locked into that one side. But,
because you can teach yourself to be ambidextrous if you work hard enough at it.
That would be hard, but yeah, I can see it happening.
Yeah, but you can. There's a lot of people that in their sport of choice, being able to maybe return a volley in tennis with the opposite hand is valuable. So they just practice and practice and practice until they develop that coordination. And I actually think that there's some value to doing that. Like learning to write with your non-dominant hand could provide benefits with the aging brain. We've talked about this on the show years ago. Here's a really good one. Is social media warping people's sense of self?
Oh, God, yeah. Actually, my PhD supervisor just came out with a really cool study, and she wanted to look at how photographs of ourselves will influence the way that we remember. And she had participants come into the lab and do a series of little kind of mini events. So people had to do these basic arts and craft projects. And they had pictures taken either from directly across to them or from their perspective or without them in the shot. And then during a second session, they were shown these photos. And then on the third session, like a few days later, what they did was actually try to retrieve those memories and report where in the kind of room they were viewing that from. And what she found is that the photos in that intervening second session actually determined what perspective you were going to use to see that in your memory during the third session. So what that means for me, I think, or the way that I interpret it, is that if you're looking at your Instagram or your Snapchat constantly, you're not going to be necessarily remembering that event that you experienced before you uploaded it, but the way that you remember it is actually going to be influenced by that video or by that photo. So every time you retrieve a memory, what you're doing is you're actually putting it into this labile malleable state. And then after a while, it goes into a consolidated state. So it opens itself back up, lets a lot of information in. Anything that you need to change and adjust, it will do that. And then the brain closes that door again until you retrieve it again. So when you retrieve a memory, what you're doing is you're not retrieving the actual original event. You're retrieving all of the iterations that you've made to it every time that you've gone back and thought about it.
Right. And we only have to look at people recalling an accident. Two people see the same accident and what they recall is vastly different.
Yeah.
And it's not like one is lying. I mean, that's the representation. Taylor C says, this is a follow-up to the discussion about organs changing personalities and memories. One story was from a young girl who, excuse me, a man who got a heart from a young girl. He was in his 60s. He developed an affinity for bubble baths. He found out that the girl had an obsession with bubble baths. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but I'm just not quite. It's hard to validate those kind of studies, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, like maybe.
Yeah, I mean, he may have done that. Yeah, he may have done that because he was honoring this girl, and he heard that she loved bubble baths, so he started taking bubble baths. Yeah, that. I mean, you could look at his brain and see if it's a memory. I guess.
Send him my way.
Yeah, there you go. There's an ideal that suggests the gut. This is from Claude Lavertu. is the second brain. My hypothesis is the gut is the first brain. It's
Mhm.
why we feel and act by instruction, intuition, and the brain is the processor of cognition. I disagree with that vehemently.
Vehemently strong.
Yes. Yeah. So what we know about the gut's influence on the brain is the microbes make chemicals that
Mhm.
cause you to crave foods. The microbes make chemicals that cause you to crave alcohol.
Mhm.
Um, the relationship between the gut and the brain, the gut definitely influences the brain and action. There's no doubt about it. But the gut is not the brain. The gut is nagging the brain. Hey, come on, give me this, do this, do this. Very, very different. And it frustrates me when people say, well, the gut is the second brain. If you stub your toe, you will limp for the next week. Your toe is not the third brain.
Yeah.
You're limping because you have pain and you're reacting to it, but the brain is the one that's making the decision not to step hard on the toe.
Yeah, but your gut definitely does have neurons, and it's an incredibly complicated system that I think we're just kind of breaking into. And I think a lot of the projects that are getting funded in my line of research have a lot to do with gut-brain interactions. And these diseases that we used to think of as purely neurological diseases like Parkinson's, we thought, okay, it's the degradation of dopamine production in the substantia nigra.
No, it starts in the gut.
Open closed. But
Yeah.
yeah, I guess now
But
a
see,
couple
but
years
that's
ago, a
but,
study
but that's
came out.
but
Wait,
that's another one of these examples. So the microbiota gets destroyed in people with Parkinson's disease, and they end up with these rogue microbes. That, like, the first thing that happens to people about 10 years before they develop is constipation. Wait a minute, what? 10 years before? So what's going on in the gut influences the brain. There's no doubt about it, and influences every disease. Every autoimmune disorder starts in the gut. Rheumatoid arthritis can be managed by diet. So, but we have to stop trying to idealize the gut and say, oh, but the gut is the second brain. It's not the second brain. It has a close connection to influencing the brain. We know that there's a bundle of nerves that go right up the vagus into the brain that the gut leverages when it's sending these toxins, these neurotransmitters to the brain to say, hey, do this and do that. But that doesn't mean the gut is the brain. And we have to be careful. I know we want to believe all of this stuff, but the brain is the brain.
I think it's just interesting from a historical perspective, because you ask the Egyptians what does the brain do, and they're like, you just throw it out, it does nothing. So I think right now in society we're so focused on the brain because only within the last 20-30 years are we actually able to look at inside of a human brain, take pictures and movies of it in real time in healthy people, which is pretty fascinating. So us as a culture, very brain focused right now, but that's definitely not how it's been in the past, and I think that will change, and as we're seeing now with this more focus on the gut brain interactions.
And Claude says he doesn't agree with me, and I find that's fine. I mean, I'm happy because I could be wrong, but the reality is that there are children that are on the spectrum that when they change the diversity of their guts using specific microbes like L. plantarum and L. reuteri, all of their symptoms, their unruliness, their difficulty in being managed in school, it literally subsides. I did that show in 2008. I had a woman who was a doctor from the UK who wrote a book about L. plantarum, that particular probiotic that supplementing with L. plantarum changed the outcome and trajectory of her son's life. Now, is L. plantarum what everybody needs? Absolutely not. But what it is focusing on is, look, opioid addicts, they end up with a horrible gut microbiome. They end up with horrible gut problems. They're constipated all the time. Gut motility slows down. And that is what destroys their bodies. It's not the opioid that destroys their bodies. It's the changes in the gut that destroy their bodies. So I will stand back and let the people who do the science. But I think what we're going to find out is these microbes produce chemicals that influence what we do. And they lead us around by our nose. Hey, go eat this, go get that. I need that. And it's not really good for you. Last two questions. Let's go. Michael, Michael says, what can we do for the gut? I know I probably missed that advice already. I don't think we gave any advice about the gut, did we? We didn't.
No. I think it's it's a pretty brand new field, and they're still really trying to figure out exactly what advice you should be able to give. And from what I've read, it seems that everybody's microbiome in their gut is so particular to them. So I think,
Very much so.
like, I know when I am not eating enough iron, my body automatically craves spinach and other leafy greens. So I think it's just about kind of listening. What, like you said, you're led by your nose. Your body knows. Just listen to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take our last commercial break, and we'll wrap up this interview. Fascinating stuff. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
If you've listened to Superhuman Radio for any length of time, you know I'm a big proponent of peptides. One of my favorites is GHK-Cu, the blue copper peptide. It has the ability to repair and regenerate more youthful expression of skin cells, reversing the signs of aging. Restora Cell's Stem Cell Awakening Serum, along with their other products, contains potent formulations of blue copper peptides and only the highest quality organic ingredients. Superhuman Radio listeners can now save 25% site-wide. Go to shrnetwork.biz/blue and use the code SHR25. Remodel your skin today.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is My Pillow. I've been sleeping with My Pillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have My Pillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/mypillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
This is the Superhuman Channel, doing reps with the weight of the world.
Well, I have to apologize to you, Heather.
Not at all. Why?
Apparently I'm stealing your thunder. I don't know who this is.
Not at all.
Somebody on YouTube said, "LOL, she can't get a whole sentence through." So I have 2 more questions for you, and I will be quiet. I promise. So, was there anything that happened in this study that surprised you?
Yeah, there's always quite a few things that surprise you in every study, except my favorite part about being a researcher is just every day is a little bit different, and you can plan as much as you want and think about all of the possible outcomes and anticipated issues as much as you like. But once you start actually doing the experiment, you realize there are a million things that you didn't think of, and things come up. But I guess one of the results I was quite surprised by was I thought that just body ownership alone would be enough to make memory stronger over time. And I was happy to see that it happened specifically in the hippocampus, which is this hub of memory processing that kind of pulls all the different memory elements together into a cohesive mental scene for you to relive. I thought that body ownership during encoding might directly impact on that. But what we actually ended up finding was that it's not about body ownership and memory formation alone. It factors in how vividly you can remember a memory as well. So it's this combination of memory vividness, the clarity of your mental images, and the sense of body ownership that are both combining to strengthen this memory representation over time.
Claude says, fascinating show. Thank you very much to you.
Nice to hear from you, Claude.
And so, what do you want clinicians and lay people to take away from your work?
Not to take the body for granted. I think it's really easy to, but what my line of research and a growing field of research is showing right now is that this thing that we take for granted actually has a lot to do with our cognition, our ability to remember the world around us, our ability to interact with it as well. So something that we think of as memory, which seems so cognitive and in your head, is actually so grounded in how you feel about your body.
Do you do you think that people who have dissociative disorder, which is a clinical diagnosis, and they feel like their body doesn't belong to them, right? Isn't that what they have?
Mm-hmm. There are different components of it. Dissociation is one of them, where they feel detached from their body. They might feel like they're going numb, or they're dissolving, or they're floating away, and they're seeing themselves from kind of an out-of-body perspective. But then there's also another set of symptoms that have to do with not depersonalization of how your body feels, but derealization of the external environment, and the world stops feeling real, kind of mimicking what might happen with psychedelics. Yeah. So I guess what we were trying to do with this study is kind of isolate this body ownership aspect of depersonalization, but in healthy people, because what we want to do before we can help anybody with a clinical disorder is basically just understand the relationship between your body and your memory in no uncertain terms, just in healthy people, to get an idea of what the system is supposed to look like, and then see how it breaks down in these other cognitive disorders.
Will you be working with hallucinogenics at any point in your research?
It's not on the docket, but I mean, got a long career ahead of me, so don't rule it out.
I mean, it's one of the things that has the greatest profound effect on our sense of reality for short periods of time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Have you? God, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Have you seen the movie or the documentary "Fantastic Fungi"?
I've seen it come up on my Netflix queue. It's on my watch list.
It. It's fascinating.
I love fungi.
They talk about how the human brain was influenced by something, and now they think it was hallucinogenics. Native Americans would travel behind the buffalo, and they would pick the spores that grew out of their feces, and they would trip. And they make a really strong case for our ability to visualize tools and make them, and a lot of the trajectory. There's a period of time where they show our brain underwent rapid, massive growth.
Yes, it did.
And they try to make the argument that it's the result of being exposed to psychedelics.
That is a very strong argument, because the way that I was taught in my education was our ability to cook meat. Our ability to make fire and start cooking and storing meat just meant that we had a lot more resources available. And because we were eating more and eating more high quality protein, this ended up, generating our frontal cortex, essentially.
Mm-hmm. You should watch it. It's fascinating. Yeah, it really is fascinating.
Another theory that it's not necessarily just about the food that we ate, but it was about our need to interact as a social animal. And that complexity of social dynamics ended up kind of growing our brains for us. But that's the thing with evolutionary psychology. How are you actually supposed to test any of these? I like the mushroom theory, though.
Dr. Daniel Lieberman had been on my show twice. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's the Harvard doctor, anthropologist, who wrote the book, The Story of the Human Body. The book is fascinating. It was a game changer for me. And he talked about the fact that the two greatest things that happened to us was the ability to ambulate, to stand up and walk, because that affected so many things. The speed in which we could travel, the sun didn't hit us in large planes because we weren't down on our hands and knees. But he said the other thing was, and this isn't unique to us, but our willingness to cooperate, to raise someone else's child because they got killed, hunt and feed other people in the party who didn't have males who could hunt for them. Our ability to cooperate was another thing that really catapulted us, because we could all get together, 60 of us, say, okay, let's build this big structure. We can sleep in it and be safe in it.
Yeah.
So anyway, fascinating stuff. I hope that you will come back.
Of course,
We
happy
have
to.
do work. And yeah, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the great questions from your audience.
And sorry if I stepped on you. I get very excited. Ooh. I'm like horseback on staccato. Ooh. It's just who I am. Can't apologize. It's too late for me to apologize. Okay, see you soon again. Okay, thank you
Nice
so much.
talking to you. Bye.
And that's it for today. Today is Thursday. I don't have a show for tomorrow, and I'm happy because I just want to convalesce and get better. And please share the show. Always share the shows. You never know. You may help one person by sharing this show on your Facebook wall, on your social media, or emailing a link to a friend, and you could actually change a life. And we will see you Monday with more Superhuman Radio. Okay, take care.